Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Welcome to Strange Things with Chris James, broadcasting from the auxiliary radio station for Arkanasa Radio in Laredo, Texas. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Alien Artifacts is tonight's show. But it looks like we made it to 2021. 2022 is in the past. It no longer is an issue. It will be what all other years are compared to. I just hope the folks who kept telling us the world was going to end in December 21st, 2012, didn't get the last two numbers transposed. It's a long way to December 21st, 2021. I hope it's a smooth stroll and not an all-out scramble. I received a copy of this movie, but the sender said not to mention his name. So instead I'll give credit to all my listeners and the guys who made the video. Alien Artifacts and the Lost World was made by J. Michael Long and starring Charles Thompson and Paul Hughes. The trouble you run into watching old documentaries is they're only as good as the information that was available at the time they were made. As new information comes into the light of day, the facts presented by the filmmakers can change in one direction or the other. Remember all those folks talking about the Mayan calendar and the end of the world? You don't hear much from them anymore. Every time they show an episode of Ancient Aliens and they're talking about the upcoming apocalypse or whatever it was going to be, it's kind of funny now. The movie's description goes, "The shocking existence and unexplained origins of artifacts that are so technologically advanced they have mystified scientists and researchers for decades. They defy comprehension and contradict all we have been told about the ancient world. From the 500,000-year-old spark plug to the billion-year-old metal sphere, prepare to have your mind blown with the fascinating alien artifacts found on planet Earth." The first portion of the video is the story of the Coso artifact. February 13th, 1961, Wallace Lane, Virginia Maxey, and Mike Mikesell were out looking for interesting mineral specimens, in particular geodes. They wanted these for their LM&V Rockhounds Gem and Gift Shop in Olanka, Florida. The three were about 6 miles northeast of Olanka, near the top of a peak about 4,300 feet in elevation. Around lunchtime, after collecting rocks all morning, they'd put all their specimens into one bag to take it home and dig through it later. The next day, as the gift shop's workroom, Mikesell was cutting the geode open to see what they had to add to their shop. A geode is a small cavity in a rock lined with crystals or other mineral matter, or a hollow rock filled with sparkly things. He was using a brand new diamond-tipped saw blade. As he cut into one of the rocks, the blade began to heat up, which is very bad for blades and rocks. Things break and they get really hot. Bits and pieces fly in every direction. Separating the two halves, Mikesell was startled to find the rock wasn't hollow as expected, but it held an iron core with a solid piece of porcelain. The porcelain looked to be a small part of the shaft running through the middle of the rock. The metal shaft responded to a magnet. There were other odd qualities about the specimen. The outer layer of the specimen was encrusted with fossil shells and their fragments. In addition to shells, the discoverers noticed two non-magnetic metal objects in the crust, resembling a nail and a washer. Stranger still, the inner layer was hexagonal and seemed to form a casing around a hard porcelain cylinder. Within the inner layer, a layer of decomposing copper surrounded the porcelain cylinder. The three shop owners were mystified by this weird artifact. Virginia Maxey contacted a geologist who examined the fossil shells encrusting the specimen and said that the nodule had taken at least 500,000 years to attain its form. However, the identity of the first geologist is still a mystery, and his findings were never published. Another investigation was conducted by the creationist Ron Caillet. Caillet is the only other individual known to have physically inspected the artifact, and he was allowed to record images of the nodule using both X-ray and natural light photography. The X-rays of the upper end of the object seemed to reveal some sort of a tiny spring or a helix. Info magazine journal editor Ronald J. Willis speculated it could actually be the remains of a corroded piece of metal with threads. The other half of the artifact revealed a sheath of metal, presumably copper, covering a porcelain cylinder. Wallace Lane was the last known owner to possess the Casso artifact. Possess. Wallace Lane was the last known owner to possess the Casso artifact. Lane had the object on display in his home, but he adamantly refused to allow anyone to examine it. He had a standing offer to sell it for $25,000. You want to examine the artifact? You had to buy it. In 1999, a national search to locate any of the original discoverers proved faultless. It was speculated that Lane was dead. Maxey may have still been alive, but was avoiding any public comment or inquiry. The whereabouts of Maxell was never established, and to this day his whereabouts remains unknown. To make matters worse, the location of the artifact is also unknown. The only information on the Casso artifact is from Willis's 1969 article, or the statements made by the owners. Before her disappearance, Virginia Maxey had said the Casso artifact might have been some kind of a communications device from 500,000 years ago. She speculated it might have been from Mu or Atlantis. Once the artifact and the discoverers were no longer around to make their case, the nasty, noisy, negative naysayers arrived. They took no time in coming out with explanations, despite not being able to talk to the owners or look at the specimen. One explanation came out saying it was an old-fashioned spark plug that had become encased in concretion over the last 100 years. I looked at the images of the artifact compared to old spark plug, and yes, they do look similar. The main problem I have is if this was nothing more than a spark plug, why did somebody secret it away? Had the three finders made a mistake, wouldn't it have been far easier to just come out and say, "Boy, did we make a mistake," instead of disappearing into the mists of time? How come the naysayers didn't say anything until it was impossible to refute them? To me, it looked like somebody doesn't want anyone to think there might be things on our planet unexplainable by the guys in the white lab coats. It just might have been an old spark plug, but boy did it go about proving it in the weirdest way. It was odd that the creationists would weigh in on the artifact as being something so old as to be thousands of years from our past. Numerous creationists have been involved with this artifact since its discovery. Caillet, who was involved with the Casso artifact since its initial discovery, is an active contributor to creationist literature. He brought the artifact to the attention of the Charles Fort Society. A Creation Outreach, a Spokane, Washington-based creationism ministry, promotes the artifact on its website by reprinting the article by J.R. Jacquemins, which concludes, "As a whole, the Caso artifact is now believed to be something more than a piece of machinery. The carefully shaped ceramic metal shaft and copper components hit at some form of electrical instrument. The closest modern apparatus that researchers have been able to equate it with is a spark plug. However, there are certain features, particularly the spring or helix terminal, that does not correspond to any known spark plug today. Believing in creation, as well as one God who made everything, isn't at odds with the world having been inhabited for millions of years. Some will say, yes, but the Bible says the earth is only 75,000 years old. They base this on counting the years as they are written down. What some folks don't think into is when the Bible says something happened for 40 days and 40 nights, such as the flood, the rain, it doesn't mean the number between 39 and 41. It means a long time, more than a month. When the earth was created in 6 days, what was a day based on? Our day is based on the rotation of our planet. The earth didn't exist yet, so what was a day based on? It could have been the rotation of the universe, and that would have been a long time. People get into trouble when they start to say they know things that they don't. I know how to use a gun. I know how to drive a vehicle. I know how to cook. I do not know how to dance. I can drive my pickup all over town and not get into trouble, but drag me onto the dance floor and things get ugly. Too many people have come out saying they have figured something out, only to be proven wrong on many occasions. The Bible was written in Aramaic. It was translated into Greek and then Latin. The folks doing the translating made a few mistakes, and they made a few changes to slant things into what they thought should be written. A group of creationists, believing the world could be millions of years old and man could have created fantastic machines, only to become confused and lose the knowledge, is not that hard to understand. Scientists say the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. How long has man been here? That is waiting to be discovered. Look at all the reports of people finding something that couldn't be explained away, and then some government agency shows up and the evidence vanishes. People like to live in comfort. Thinking the folks in charge just might not have our best interests at heart is uncomfortable for some. They would rather be told pretty lies than brutal truths. The Institute for Creation Research, the ICR, adjunct facility member Donald Chittick has been heavily promoting the Caso artifact. In The Puzzle of Ancient Man, Chittick presents the Caso artifact as evidence that ancient civilizations were extremely advanced. Presuming that it's an ancient spark plug, Chittick explains his inference that this find indicates technological sophistication. He admits that reliable dates are unlikely, but then goes on to argue that the plug is old because geodes take long to form. Well, the Caso artifact isn't really a geode, but people like to refer to it as one. Remember, a geode is a hollow space. There's no hollow space on the Caso artifact. Chittick says the plug was found inside a naturally occurring geode, which would indicate great age and therefore an out-of-place artifact. This, he argues, refutes evolution, since evolutionary models fail to explain the existence of such sophisticated technology so long ago. The creationists are saying the artifact was made by ancient man. Others say it was left here by aliens from outer space. Thousands of years ago, some alien race visited Earth. Once they had tinkered about with the people living here, the aliens packed up and left. Over centuries, any machines or buildings would have devolved into their original components, and not everything would have crumbled away. If you find the idea of aliens from outer space coming to Earth to manipulate the folks living here, then why do you accept angels? They sure aren't from here, therefore they would qualify as being extraterrestrials. Angels come down to Earth and tell people to do things, and then they fly away back to heaven. Georgios Tsoukalos talks about this all the time on Ancient Aliens. If thinking aliens landing here thousands of years ago doesn't sit well, then just think angels landed here thousands of years ago. And when they left, they forgot one or two things, like a weird-looking metallic and ceramic device that wound up being stuck inside a rock. If the idea of angels goes against your thought process, then you're free to think they were actually aliens that could fly and had wonderful gadgets that looked nothing like nothing found on Earth today. The important thing is to not believe everything the guys in the white lab coats tell you. Look at the evidence and come to your own conclusions. If the evidence is missing, like most of it is, then do the research. See what others have said, and then decide. Don't let others do your thinking. In January 1936, a strange disk was unearthed at the plateau edge of North Saqqara, approximately 1 mile north of Gesaris Step Pyramid in Egypt. That's a mouthful. Archaeologists were digging around the tomb of Prince Sabu, who lived 5,100 years ago. Sabu was the son of Pharaoh, too many letters, Anidzheba. He was the 5th ruler of the first dynasty of ancient Egypt, and a high official or administrator of a town or province, possibly called a star of the family of Horus. They figured all that out looking at those weird carvings on tombs. Hieroglyphics. Workers unearthed a weird-looking disk that, when examined, only brought more questions than answers. The disk was called the schist disk, and I'm going to try very hard not to mispronounce that one. The disk was made from schist, which is a kind of a stone, and was carved into an intricate disc shape that would have required hundreds of hours and skill that we don't have today. The disc is about 2 feet across. It looks like a weird steering wheel. It has 3 openings in it and 3 stone-looking folds that bend over towards the center. The flaps are extremely thin, so they couldn't have been made using a hammer and chisel. The disc was made about 5,000 years ago. It was believed to be an ancient wheel, but the experts say that Egypt didn't have the wheel until 1500 BC. Besides, who would make a stone wheel that is so thin it would break under any pressure? If the schist disk is in fact a wheel, it would mean ancient Egyptians possessed knowledge of the wheel about 3000 BC during the time of the first dynasty. This would require Egyptologists to rewrite some history books. Scientists hate having to rewrite anything. It might make us all think that they're not as smart as they tell us they are. Some scientists suggested that the fragile nature of such an intricately carved stone object greatly limits its particular usage and suggests a purely ornamental function, being of a religious or other such ritualistic purpose. If this thing was an oil lamp, why such an intricate design? It must have taken years to make, and it was so fragile one tiny slip would have required starting all over again. Many who have looked at the schist disk say it must be used for something more interesting than just a lamp. Why spend years making a lamp? The object looks like it was used for something that we can't quite figure out. A stone is great if you want a long-lasting heavy object. Monuments, buildings, statues, things like that. It's not good for things you want to use. This led some investigators to say maybe the object was a recreation of something. Years ago, someone saw a machine or a device made from metal, and they wanted to recreate it, so they used the only material they had on hand, stone. This theory was put forth by folks saying the object was some kind of an important part of some machine that came to Earth, was used for important things, and then left. If the schist disk were made of metal, the three blades could be bent backwards into the three spaces. The whole thing would be a flat disk. To make matters even more interesting, if this disk is a representation of something seen long ago, we don't really know its dimensions. The disk could have represented something enormous, maybe as big as a flying saucer or even the mothership. This could also go the other direction. The device could represent something that originally was used for some mundane purpose, say a ventilation fan or a cap on something. We may never know for sure what the schist disk was used for. Unless the original device is found or comes back for a visit, the mystery may go on forever. Should the original device be found, the folks who want to control everything will keep it to themselves and will probably still be in the dark. Down south from us are the bronze gears of ancient Peru, or gears of ancient Peru, which are considered by many to be one of the most mysterious artifacts discovered in South America. Not much is known about the gears. They're considered by many as the ultimate evidence that thousands of years before the Inca, an advanced civilization flourished in South America. The boys in the white lab coats say the gears are nothing but representations of the sun, artistic renderings of the sun god in the sky. Today, when you talk about the bronze gears of Peru, some people will say they are out-of-place artifacts, while skeptics remain confident they are nothing more than mere decorative items used by ancient people who worship the sun. To me, the bronze gears look just like the rear cluster on my bike. I seriously doubt the Mayans had bicycles, but then it would have been interesting to see. The experts say the Mayans didn't have the wheel at any time during their reign. I find this odd since they did have ancient balls. Seeing how a ball rolls along the ground, you'd think somebody would have said, if we cut that thing into thin slices, we could roll things on it. But the white lab coats boys say no. There's little information about what the gears were used for. There are a few photographs which show the gears, which look to be in good shape, but no one knows for sure what their purpose might have been. The pictures of the discs show 6 circular objects that resemble mechanical gears with teeth. This has led many to believe they were part of a much larger machine that was used by the ancient people of Peru. In the Mediterranean, divers recovered the Antikythera mechanism, a computer that dated back thousands of years. The device was composed of numerous gears which resembled those found in Peru. Once again, the white lab coat boys will tell us the people living in Peru could never have contact with the folks living in Greece because there's a bunch of water in the way. The Antikythera mechanism consists of different types of gears and is so complex that many consider it the first analog computer to be made by man. Found housed in a 13 by 7 by 3 inch wooden box, the device is a complex clockwork mechanism composed of at least 30 meshing bronze gears. Ancient Greeks and Romans wrote of using a device to predict the movement of the stars. A recreation of the Antikythera mechanism showed the times of the year when eclipses would happen, as well as the phases of the moon and the positions of the stars. Whether or not the enigmatic bronze gears of ancient Peru were used in a similar way as the gears inside the Antikythera mechanism is hard to tell. Before the discovery of the Antikythera mechanism, researchers believed that the ancient man was incapable of creating complex machines or computers. The discovery of the mechanism changed everything. Is it too hard to imagine the ancient Greeks and Romans sailing across the Atlantic Ocean and making contact with the Mayans? They knew the earth was round. They knew how to sail. A trade was common amongst the people all over the planet. Perhaps some Roman sailor came cruising into port in South or Central America and he wanted some of their gold, so he offered up his computer in trade. The gears can't be studied today because, like a lot of mysterious findings, they have vanished. Someone, somewhere, has them hidden away so the rest of us can't look them over for ourselves. All we have today are the photographs taken years ago. Some researchers have looked at the photographs and come up with the idea that maybe they had a connection to the Puerta de Haya Marca, or the doorway of the Amaru. I talked about this doorway in the show Stargates. The researchers have made a connection between the bronze gears and the portal, or Stargate. The dodecahedron. Oh, boy, here we go with another one of those words. I actually listened to this thing, how it's pronounced, dozens of times, so I'd have it burned into my mind. And then I look at the word, and it's like, oh, geez, too many letters. A dodecahedron is a 12-sided object. Picture a cube, but with a few more sides, like twice as many. Each side is made from a pentagram or a 5-sided surface. The Roman dodecahedron is a small hollow object made of bronze or stone. These dodecahedrons are embellished with a series of knobs on each center point of the pentagrams, and many of the surfaces have circular holes in them. Now, some of these holes are small, while others they take up the entire pentagram face. The first dodecahedron was found in 1739. Since then, at least 116 similar objects have been found in Wales, Hungary, Spain, and east of Italy. Most of them were found in Germany and France. Roman dodecahedrons date from the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD, are typically from 1.5 inches to 4.5 inches across. Most were unadorned, but a few had carvings on their faces. Some looked downright fancy. Folks kept finding these 12-sided objects as they searched for artifacts. As more and more of them turned up, scientists began to wonder what they might be used for. Nobody could find any writings pertaining to small, multi-sided objects being used for any purposes as they dug through the scrolls and the tablets from 1800 years ago. The devices were found in areas that had been controlled by the Romans back in the 1800s, so these things must have some connection to the Romans. Someone said these things were toys, thrown back and forth in some kind of a game. If so, why put knobs on all the points? This would have been just a bit painful to catch. A candle holder was suggested by somebody. A wax was found inside one of the many objects, so one researcher got excited thinking he had figured things out, and this led to a paper being written. Someday archaeologists are going to find an old Chianti bottle and decide they were candle holders and ignore there being wine bottles. One day, while investigating a haunted site, the LPRS found a long copper rod buried in the ground. We speculated this may have been used in some kind of a curse or a spell. The owner of the property had been having bizarre happenings for years. The story was somebody had placed a curse on the property. We reached out to other paranormal groups for information on curses, and some speculated this rod may have some connection. The owner of the property didn't want any of the artifacts we dug up, so everything was taken away. As far as I know, the curse was no longer having effect on the land. The copper rod was a ground rod used for electricity. You can buy them at the hardware store. We could have said we found a magical rod used for nefarious purposes, but it was just a ground rod. The thing to keep in mind is a copper rod may have more than one use. You can use it to ground out the electricity running through your home, or to maybe place a curse on someone you hate. The secret is don't jump to conclusions just because you have a little bit of information. In our tank, we used to smoke. We weren't supposed to, but we were kind of on our own page in the rule book. When we fired the main gun, more smoke was splashed around the turret than any smoke we could possibly create in years. We also kind of liked to keep our tank neat and clean. It was our home away from home, kind of like having an RV with guns. To keep the cigarette ash off the floor, we used 30mm shell cases as ashtrays. We used commo wire to hold them in place so they didn't spill while we were on the go. I wonder what people will think in a few thousand years when they find our ashtrays that look like ammunition cases. Many theories and speculations have been put forth concerning what the Roman dodecahedrons were used for. A candlestick holder, dice, survey instrument, devices for determining the optimal sowing date for winter grain, gauges to calibrate water pipes for standard army bases, a staff or scepter decorations, a toy to throw and catch on a stick, or simply a geometric sculpture. A popular hypothesis these days for the purpose of the device is that they were used as a knitting tool to make gloves. Martin Hallett had seen the 12-sided object, and they reminded him of a knitting loom. He tested his idea with a 3D printed replica of a Roman dodecahedron, and as he knitted away, a glove began to appear inside the device. The Roman army was expected to take care of themselves. They were self-sufficient everywhere they went. There were no supply trains to bring personal items. Soldiers would use what they had to make what they needed. The big question I have is, how did they come up with a small, multi-sided construction to create gloves? Someone was very smart back then. Look at all the things the Roman army developed as they marched through Europe, conquering everyone they met. Some inventor who wasn't busy making killing machines came up with a thing to make life better for the soldiers. Nothing like a warm pair of gloves on a cold day to liven up your spirits. The idea of a knitting device is quite striking. However, what were the dodecahedrons used for that didn't have any openings in them? Some of the most decorated objects didn't have holes to knit things into. The amount of work needed to make a multi-sided object, along with decorating it, doesn't make much sense if it was just for decoration. Knitting wouldn't work without some place for the thing you're working on to go. The openings, this opens up a whole new can of worms. Was there more than one purpose for the dodecahedrons? Another theory involved these devices as a survey or a leveling device. Neither of these theories has been supported by any proof, and exactly how the dodecahedron could be used for these purposes has not been fully explained. One rather interesting theory is the proposal that the dodecahedrons were astronomical measuring instruments for determining the optimal sowing date for winter grain. Good theory, however, the dodecahedrons came in all sizes, and the holes were not uniform. Some devices had 2 holes, while others had 12. Then there were the ones that didn't have any holes at all. Some say the dodecahedron were religious relics, once used as sacred tools for the Druids of Britannia and Caledonia. There's no written account or archaeological evidence to support this view. The Druids did live all over Britain and parts of France, but there are no written records left from them, so that kind of creates a dead end. Museums only have about 80 to 90% of their artifacts on display. Oh, let me put that in a correct manner. Museums only have 10 to 20% of their artifacts on display. The other 80 to 90% are hidden away in back rooms, packed with all manners of things dug up from the ground, only to be buried once more under layers of paperwork. No one knows what all is squirreled away in some of those back rooms. The catalogs are hammered together by folks who are in a hurry, and many times are misclassified as being things that they are not. Young archaeologists that are trying to become old archaeologists get to sort through the back rooms looking for interesting things to write uninteresting papers on. I've read a few of these papers, and then they are long and vociferous. Lots of extra words to make the papers longer. Bino Artman was digging through the back room when he found a dodecahedron that wasn't. This object had 20 sides on it instead of 12. To accomplish this, you had to use a 5-sided object and surround it with 6-sided objects. Anytime there was a need, you would throw in a 5-sided piece to round the thing out. Kind of like those dice that the Dungeons and Dragons people used. This led to a closer assessment of the Roman dodecahedrons locked away in museums. Soon they had all kinds of multi-sided objects that still needed to be explained. One thing and only one thing is certain: the Roman dodecahedrons were highly valued by their owners. This is evidenced by the fact that a number of them were found among treasure hoards with coins and other valuable items. Now, who would put their knitting needles in with their valuables? We may never know the true purpose of the Roman dodecahedron, but we can only hope that advances in archaeologists will unearth more clues that will help solve this ancient enigma. The funny thing about archaeologists, they don't find that many artifacts. Museums are filled with objects found all over the world by folks who stumble upon them. Most are found by treasure hunters. People think about treasure hunters as swooping in, grabbing the gold, and then running away. They're in it for the profit only. In reality, most treasure hunters are in it for the thrill of digging or finding something hidden away from everyone else. Once they find some valuable artifact, they notify the folks in the white lab coats, who waltz in and lay claim to history. If you get the impression I'm not a fan of archaeologists, you're mostly correct. Some, not all, but some of those folks think along the lines of, if they didn't find it, it's wrong, no matter what. If some citizen finds some fantastic object and takes it to the boys in the white lab coats, they get all upset, saying the object should have been left in the ground and dug up by the professionals. This way, the professionals can make more money. Even if leaving the object in the ground as a housing development is being built, making the object unattainable, they say, don't touch it. Another problem with archaeologists is they will move in and shut down a construction project so they can sift through the dirt one spoonful at a time, delaying the construction for years. It has gotten to a point that many found objects are being destroyed to keep the white coats out of the way during construction projects. A lot of problems today come from decisions from yesterday. And on that happy note, I'm going to play a few commercials, take a break, let my throat relax, get some coffee into my system. So don't go away, we'll be right back. If your house is infested by ghosts, maybe it's time to contact somebody that can help you. Call the Laredo Paranormal Research Society and they'll come by and see if they can't do something about your uninvited guests. You can contact the LPRS at laredoparanormal@hotmail.com. It's a bird. It's a plane. I need to get my eyes checked. Where am I going to get my eyes checked? Why, at Optica del Norte, 107 Calle del Norte, right across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. Why would anybody go through life drinking bad coffee? It's like a disgrace. Here in Laredo, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike, the best coffee on the planet. You can find them at 4501 McPherson. Or, if you don't live in Laredo, you can order at organicmancoffeetrike.shop. The absolute best coffee on the planet. It's time to take better care of your skin. After all, it is the biggest organ in your body. Contact Lourdes James at 956-723-3019. Talk to her about a free skincare consultation. This is Arkanasa Radio you've been listening to. And welcome back to the show. How many of y'all out there have been watching the Doctor Who marathon? It's been on all week. They started out showing them all in order, just one show after another, and then they started showing them all out of sequence. So it's a little annoying when it comes to the end of the show and it's to be continued next week, and then they start a different show, but I'm still watching it. It was an interesting show and kind of a long-running series, and a lot of people out there liked it, and a lot of people don't much care for the 13th Doctor, but, well, what can you do? Above the doorway inside a tomb in Egypt, archaeologists found some carvings that nobody could explain. There was a helicopter, a boat, and a spaceship. The images were found as the tomb was being cataloged by the workers. At first, the images were just written off as being symbols with hidden meaning. People examined the images, began saying those look like modern devices, only carved into a wall thousands of years ago. If you'd like, you can search for Egyptian tomb helicopter. Spell it out and you wind up with all kinds of images from some video game. Just type in Egyptian tomb helicopter and you'll see what I'm talking about. Give them a close look and then decide for yourself. Could these be representations of unknown things, or could these be things people saw or used thousands of years ago? Nostradamus had all kinds of visions of things to come. Could some long ago priest or holy man have had visions of things to come thousands of years ago? Could there have been visitors from far away that came to Earth, were seen by the guys building the tomb, and then they left? There are thousands of hieroglyphics in hundreds of tombs and buildings all over the Middle East. There are tombs yet to be discovered. How many images are there that show unknown technological devices only ever seen by the white-coated lab folks? How many discoveries have they made that the guys in charge said, "Oh, the common public can't possibly handle this, so let's keep it quiet"? Kind of like that final scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark when they take that big crate and they haul it off into that warehouse and it disappears. Something like that. During an Egyptian expedition in 1898, a team of researchers uncovered a remarkably well-built wooden model airplane in a tomb located in Saqqara. Because it was made of wood, it was possible to hone in on a more accurate date. The small plane they discovered that day was dated to have been created around 200 BC. The piece was then exhibited in a museum in Cairo in a special display. Due to the avian facial features depicted on the nose of the plane, it was called a sculpture of a bird, and it was put on display in a gallery of birds. Till 1969, the wooden bird stayed with other bird sculptures. One day, Dr. Khalil Messiah took a closer look at the artifact. He noticed there were several discrepancies in the design of the model in comparison to other pieces of Egyptian archaeology and art that were classified as birds. Most notably was the model's intentional omission of bird legs, which were commonplace among other bird artifacts. Also, traditional Egyptian birds had painted feathers, but the model did not. Incredibly, hieroglyphics depicting on the side of the airplane translated to the inscription, "Gift of Ammon," who was the ancient Egyptian god of the wind and the air. Looking at the carving, it has the face of a bird, but some of the parts don't look anything like a bird. The tail section stands upright. The very top of it is flattened off. Birds' tails go side to side, always. And just about everybody knows this, well, except maybe some of the folks who classify things in museums. The wooden carving looked more like an airplane than a bird. Some folks got to thinking, would it fly if that flat part of the tail was dealt with? They made an exact replica and attached a horizontal stabilizer to the top of the tail. They launched their model and it flew, just like any model airplane might today. The wings gave lift and the tail kept it flying straight. And not just tombs in the Middle East, but in South America as well. Strikingly accurate metal sculptures in the likeness of aircraft were found scattered among the area of coastal South America. When evaluated for age, they were estimated to have emerged from somewhere between 500 and 800 BC. That would give them 2,500 to 2,800 years old. Because the models had been made of gold, an exact date was not possible. Archaeological evidence surrounding the area served as support that the pieces could be dated as a minimum of 1,000 years in age. The models found bore striking resemblance to modern airplanes. If you watch Ancient Aliens, Giorgio Tsoukalos usually has one of these little planes on his lapel. The Dropa stones were a collection of 716 circular stones that are 12,000 years old and contain hieroglyphic markings. These stones were located in the Bayan Har Mountains of China. Some ufologists cite this discovery as proof of an extraterrestrial visit to Earth. The discovery also included a large number of dwarf-like skeletons of unknown origin. The stones have since been shrouded in mystery, once more being secreted away from the public by those who like keeping us in the dark. Dropa stones were discovered in 1938 during an expedition to a large cave system in Bayan Har Mountains, which was known as the Bayan Khar Ula until the name change. They sat on the border between Tibet and China. The Chinese professor who led the expedition, Chi Pu Tai, described the caves as artificially carved and predominantly used as a graveyard by an ancient extraterrestrial species. They found a large number of graves carefully aligned in rows. No photographs or documents exist of the ancient skeletons in the tomb. Any photos taken either vanished into some vault or were destroyed. The bodies had been described in some detail, and this is the only evidence left for us to look at. According to archaeologists, these ancient beings measured 4 feet tall and displayed abnormal characteristics. Their heads were incredibly large and developed, while the remaining parts of their bodies were relatively small, thin, and fragile. The description sounds a whole lot like what we know of as the Greys today. The expedition reportedly found 716 stone discs, otherwise known as the Dropa stones, deep inside the cave. Each disc was about 1 foot in diameter with a small hole in the middle. According to the founders, each disc contained hieroglyphic-like inscriptions in an unknown language in the form of a spiral groove. Professor New set about trying to translate the hieroglyphics. He said the hieroglyphics described the story of an alien civilization named the Dropa that arrived from another planet in a spacecraft, but they had to make an emergency landing near the area of the caves. It was also later estimated that the stones, along with the skeletons and all other scientific treasures found in the cave system, would be about 12,000 years old. Once the expedition was over, the stone discs were stored at the Beijing University for more than 2 decades. Ultimately, they fell into the hands of the Beijing Academy for Ancient Study for analysis. The university in Beijing began to claim they had no record of a person named Professor New. This is the same fate that befell Professor S.A. Jordan and G.E. Kincaid, who found the Egyptian tomb in the Grand Canyon. Based on a part of his translation, the stones recounted the story of an ancient Dropa aliens who crash-landed their spacecraft near the caves over 12,000 years ago. Unfortunately, the local Ham tribe that witnessed their arrival couldn't understand the peaceful intentions of the extraterrestrials, and they began hunting them down and, well, killing them. Just like in a sci-fi movie, the aliens were just about wiped out before the Ham were convinced they were making a bit of a mistake. As the last of the Dropa were dying off, they carved the stones into flat discs, some about the size of an LP, a record. A vinyl record that was about 12 inches across. Yes, I'm dating myself. I used to have the very first Black Sabbath LP ever made. Of course, I probably lost it somewhere. Had a Pink Floyd record, too, The Dark Side of the Moon. Lost it as well. Oh, well, that's what happens when you travel and move around a lot. You lose things. The stones were hidden away in the cave, or more than likely just left there, since the locals didn't know what they were or what they were written on them. When the Chinese archaeology expedition found the stones, at first they were just a bunch of odd flattened stones. They were placed on display in the museum as being just some ancient artifacts with a small amount of interest to anyone. It wasn't until Professor New was able to translate the writing on the stones that they became known as the Dropa stones. Suddenly, the stones took on a whole new importance. Word of the stones reached the Soviet Union, and a scientist named Dr. Syzev. The first name has too many consonants and not nearly enough vowels. Dr. Syzev took interest in them. He took it upon himself to republish the original hypothesis of research in the Soviet magazine called Sputnik. His interest in the stones far exceeded the value placed on the stones by the Chinese government, and one or two, some say a lot more, of the Dropa stones were shipped to the Soviet Union for study. As for Professor New, he became a pariah among his peers. As scientists began to look at his research and think it was just too out of there, they began pressuring him to recant his findings. New packed his bags and moved to Japan, where he lived in obscurity until his death. Dr. Syzev was busy examining the Dropa stones, and he had some interesting findings. The stone they were made of was rock that contained metal ore that made them extremely hard. Dr. Syzev said the stones were way too hard for ancient man to have carved. The person, or beings, that carved the inscriptions had to have had access to something akin to diamond-tipped tools or some kind of a stronger tool than they should have had at their disposal. More interestingly, several tests with an oscilloscope showed the Dropa stones may have been used as electrical conductors. Dr. Syzev was certain that they had been exposed to abnormally high voltages at some period back in time. An Austrian engineer named Ernst Wegerer, I was going to say Wagner, but no, it's Wegerer. The Germans pronounced their W as a V and the V as a W. You'd think after all these years they'd be able to get it right. That's why they call him Werner von Braun instead of Warner. Well, Ernst Wegerer found 2 Dropa stones in 1974. They were displayed at the Banpo Museum in Zion, where he happened to be on a guided tour. Based on his own words, the discs perfectly matched the description of the stones from decades ago. Knowing the story of the Dropa stones, Ernst asked to speak to the director of the museum. He wanted to study the stones and see if maybe their advanced technology from his time might find some clue to the folks who made them, as well as the translation of the carvings. He was allowed to take several photographs of the Dropa stones, but his request to study them was turned down. A close examination of his photos show the faces of the stone are slowly deteriorating, making the carvings harder to read. The director of the Banpo Museum in 1994, Professor Wang Zijun, said both the Dropa stones and the manager from 1974 disappeared without a trace just days after Ernst Wegerer took the photographs and requested additional information. This was the last time anyone heard or reported anything new about the discs. There's a rift in the UFO world, as some people don't place any stock in the Dropa stones. They have either bought into the mainstream science claim that the stones are either fakes or nothing of even considerance, or they simply don't want to look into them. Kind of like me with crop circles. I don't really believe in crop circles. I've seen too many fakes made, but I'm not going to say that there aren't a few real ones out there. I'm just not going to spend a whole lot of time looking into them at this time. Maybe later. There are some UFO folks who believe the stones are real and they need more study. 716 good-sized stones have gone missing. During the Chinese Cultural Revolution that kicked off in 1966, all forms of traditional culture, both Chinese and Western, were suppressed. Anything that went against the teachings of the new Chinese government under Chairman Mao was destroyed. Thousands of misguided people took to the streets armed with their little red books and any weapons they could get their hands on, and they went door to door ransacking their neighbors' homes, museums, universities, any place that had anything, burning and destroying the entire history of their country. The Dropa stones would have been considered a threat to Mao's teachings, and therefore they were probably destroyed, at least all of the ones still in China. As for the stones taken to the Soviet Union, some elitist may have gotten their hands on them, and more than likely they were secreted away in some vault or maybe sold to the highest bidder. Over a half a century deep in the jungles of Guatemala, a giant stone head was uncovered. The face had fine features, thin lips, and a large nose, and its face was directed upwards towards the sky. The face had Caucasian features, which were not consistent with any pre-Hispanic races of America. This discovery attracted attention in a very rapid pace. News of the discovery first emerged when Dr. Oscar Rafael Padilla Lara, a doctor of philosophy, lawyer, and notary, received a photograph of the head in 1987, along with a description that the photograph was taken in 1950s by the owner of the land where the head was found, and it was located somewhere in the jungles of Guatemala. The photograph and the story was printed in a small article in the newsletter Ancient Skies, which was picked up and read by well-known explorer and author David Hatcher Childress. He managed to track down Dr. Padilla, hoping to be able to research the stone head firsthand. Padilla was able to make contact with the owner of the property, the Biner family, on which the monolith was found. The site was 6 miles from a small village in La Democracia in South Guatemala. Dr. Padilla said when he reached the site, he found that the entire area where the stone head had been obliterated. It was destroyed by revolutionaries about 10 years previous. He had located the statue, but it was too late. These people had used this giant stone head for target practice. This totally disfigured it. It's sort of like the way the Sphinx in Egypt had its nose shot off by the Turks, only a lot worse. He said, eyes, nose, mouth had completely gone. Padilla was unable to measure what was left of the head. It stood about 20 feet high, with a neck that extended down into the ground. He thought that perhaps the head sat on top of a huge stone statue that was buried underground. Padilla quickly packed his bags and got out of the area, fearing more armed attacks between the government and rebel forces that were still in the area. The fighting went on for some time, making further investigation impossible. In 2012, a film called Revolutions of the Mayans and Beyond came out. Based on what little evidence was still available, they came to the conclusion that the head had been carved by aliens. Now, I'm not saying it wasn't aliens, but that was a bit of a reach. The head could have been carved by some advanced civilization that once lived in the area where Guatemala would become, a civilization that traveled around the world having contact with other cultures. By immediately playing the alien card, the folks in the film kind of alienated, get it? All the folks that claim there are no other worlds with life on them. They also push the folks who say they can't get here from there away as well. The idea of scientific study is to understand things that we don't. Unfortunately, a lot of folks today study things to reinforce their preconceived notions of the world and squash any ideas they consider to be too weird. The giant head did exist, and there's no evidence to suggest that the original photograph is not authentic or that Dr. Padilla's account was false. There have been other huge stone heads found that show features of other races the Mayans were not supposed to have met. Many of these heads are looking upwards, gazing towards the stars. The region where the stone head was found, La Democracia, was already famous for other stone heads which also faced skywards. These are known to have been created by the Olmec civilization, which flourished between 1400 and 400 BC. The funny thing about the Olmecs is they don't really know a whole lot about these people. They just know that they were there. The 1950s photograph does not share the same features or the style as the Olmec heads. The late Philip Coppens, Belgian author, radio host, and TV commentator on matters of alternative history, raised the question of whether the head is an anomaly of the Olmec period or whether it is part of an unknown culture that predated or postdated the Olmecs, and whose only artifacts identified so far is the Padilla head. You've seen Philip Coppens on Ancient Aliens. He used to be on a lot in the past. Unfortunately, he died a few years ago. But if you ever watched Ancient Aliens, you've probably seen him. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show. Happy New Year and all that. Let's all pray that the coming year is a lot less interesting than the last one. Anytime somebody comes along with a theory on what the past looked like, do some digging. Find out if the story is real or is something others want you to believe. Ask yourself, what does the person telling you what to believe have in stock for keeping their opinion in your mind? Until next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, the same murder three? Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?